you're doing well. Just enjoying some Step Ahead by Proud Mary. It's a Costa Rican from Cerro San Luis. It's a Finca El Vendado. It's very good. It's got a lot of interesting flavors going on there. Proud Mary is one of my go-to roasters here in Portland. There's a couple of different roasters of theirs in between Australia, Austin, and Portland. So today I want to talk about Jurassic Park, which you knew was going to come at some point. I mean, I clearly am a fan of dinosaurs. I mean, this is from the original movie in like '93. I've had these since the '80s, and same with this replica T-Rex tooth. I just got this for Christmas. It's a Jurassic Park from the original one, Brachiosaurus. We'll talk more about Brachiosaurus later, because that is a change from the book in the movie. And I'm also going to talk about The Rise and Fall of Dinosaurs, which is a really fantastic book. It's this one here. I had the Folio Society version of it because I have decided that if I'm going to buy a book, I'm going to get the fancy version of it, because I generally can't read the book because of my health issues. So I generally have been buying ebooks either through Kindle. I just got a books e-reader, so I can buy it from bookshop.org. I'm sure you've noticed that all my links are bookshop.org. That's very intentional. I'm trying to help steer people towards Bookshop instead of Amazon. The other book I'm going to talk about is one that just came out. I don't have a physical copy of it. It's called When the Earth Was Green, and this one isn't only about dinosaurs, but it definitely touches on them, and it covers the co-evolution of plants and animals and how they've worked together and fought together, I guess you could say, fought against each other. And of course, since there's a long period of time where the dinosaurs were dominant, the author Riley Black, she talks about them for an extended period of time. So let's go ahead and get into it. So I think all of us, we can say that we're pretty familiar with Jurassic Park. John Hammond is a very rich man who decides that a zoo isn't enough. He needs, no matter the exotic animals that are alive now, they're not exotic enough. He wants to do something more audacious. He wants to bring back dinosaurs. So he created a company specifically to bring back the dinosaurs called InGen. And InGen is a genetic research company. I think it is, and Crichton talks about this in his book, but he talks about how it's somewhat related to Genentech, which Genentech is an actual company. It's like modeled after that to some extent, but instead of doing research on human genome and diseases, which Hammond and Wu, the key researcher in Jurassic Park, Henry Wu, they felt that diseases and all that wasn't something that you could financialize long term. They wanted to be able to patent dinosaur DNA and dinosaur genomes, and part of it was that Hammond is very anti-regulation. I would honestly say that I think that whether Crichton read any Ayn Rand or anything like that, he created the prototypical Randian hero, or you can see parallels between Hammond and Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and a lot of these leaders who want to do seasteading, or they want to go buy an island somewhere and put their company on that island so they can avoid all government regulations and restrictions. And Hammond does that. That's the whole reason why Hammond leases. He doesn't own it, even though he talks as if he owns it throughout the book. He leases this island off the coast of Costa Rica because he wants full control. He doesn't want to have government oversight. He doesn't want anybody looking at at what he's doing. So I think that Crichton may have been mocking the idea, because I don't really think Crichton thinks that that's a viable option for how to run a company. I think he's somewhat critical of it because it doesn't seem real compared to how Crichton kind of talks about other things. Since Ian Malcolm is something of an author insert in this, I think it's fair to say that that Crichton does want to have some interaction with government, does think that there should be some government insight, or at least some investigation into these things. I know later in life he became a climate skeptic, so maybe it's not the case. As I mentioned, I got the Rise and Fall of Dinosaurs. My wife bought that for me for my birthday. And one of the things that I think was great in that is Steve Brusatte really points out the time periods that we're dealing with. So the time between when the original Stegosaurus was first evolved into when the Tyrannosaurus evolved, more time had passed between those time periods and between us and the Tyrannosaurus. It is a mind-boggling amount of time how long the dinosaurs ruled the earth. We're talking 100 million years between this guy and this guy. And there weren't really any stegosaurs with their thagomizers, which I love the name of their tail. It's a thagomizer. Instead, the Triceratops and Ceratopsians were the dominant herbivore, at least at the same time in the United States with the Tyrannosaur, which I think is just kind of fascinating. We kind of take for granted that these dinosaurs all lived at the same time. With Jurassic Park itself, all these dinosaurs were thrown together, and that's something that is constantly called out as we don't know how these dinosaurs would interact. They don't know how to interact with each other. You know, they don't know how to learn. They haven't learned anything from anybody. They are the first dinosaurs that have existed. They literally addressed the question, the chicken or the egg. Their egg came first. Their egg came before there was any other dinosaur again in whenever they came back. There was no one to teach the Triceratops what to eat, what not to eat. There was no one to teach the Tyrannosaur how to patrol their area. They just did it by instinct and what they felt was right as animals, which, was part of the risk and part of the concern that people like Ian Malcolm had and that Ellie Statler had, and especially the idea of the biology of the flora interacting with the fauna. That's really ill discussed both in Crichton and kind of like glossed over. I mean, Crichton talks about it. It's a kind of a toss-away line. Everybody remembers that whenever in the movie where the Triceratops is sick and, Malcolm says that's one big pile of shit. And Grant lays on the belly of the Triceratops. Well, in the book, it's actually the Stegosaur that actually does that. And the movie kind of cuts out the key learning of what Ellie and Harding, the vet, uncover in that case, which is that dinosaurs have gizzards in this. And I think we've actually found gizzards. I just saw and found the stones in some of the fossilized dinosaurs. I know I saw an example, a video, I haven't watched it yet, but there's we found a fossilized heart in one Ankylosaurus type. We've actually found the skin on the dinosaurs. So we have evidence of like how they ate, how they had to digest their food. Like in When the Earth Was Green, Black talks about how these great big dinosaurs, and including this one here, really had massive fermentation tanks because they didn't really have molars. They didn't have teeth to break down and chew anything. They had these little pencil type teeth that allowed them to crack through branches. And then the gizzard, the stones, would crush up and basically masticate in their stomach. And so in that case where they found that sick animal, and with those African lilacs that Harding was convinced the dinosaurs didn't eat, well, what Ellie recognized is that because of the gizzard stones, they found piles of really smooth stones, and that the lilacs grew out of piles of rocks, that the dinosaurs weren't eating them, they were eating them with the rocks. So they ended up ingesting these berries that would make them sick, because they would only keep the gizzard stones in their stomach for a certain amount of time, and they would go around their little enclosed area, and the rocks they preferred were where the lilacs were. And not really appreciating the interaction of dinosaurs' biology, how they actually ate plants, the way that the plants grew, really shows that we don't know how any of these animals would interact with each other, how they would interact with us, what they would actually do. It is a very interesting view that is discussed and touched on. I have a feeling that there was probably a draft that Crichton had where he had more of that, because I mean, he included a paleobiologist, or botanist rather, and you don't include that character just because you want an attractive female character. I mean, they could have done that anyway, but in this case, I think that there is more conversation to be had about the ecology that these dinosaurs were in. So one of the things that Crichton got wrong, which has been continued through all the Jurassic Worlds, and they kind of spin it as these dinosaurs look wrong because they have frog DNA in them, and so the frog DNA drives some of these differences, because they found that basically every dinosaur has proto-feathers or feathers on them. So like dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurids, they have very thin hair that's almost more like hair like ours, and it doesn't really branch a whole lot. But raptors, they had full coats. Like that entire part of the theropod branch had a large amount of hair, feathers, and they grew increasingly complex as things went along. And I believe even stegosaurids had it as well. And one of the early discoveries of stegosaurids, at least according to Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong, actually indicates that they found some rust-colored things. In a video by Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong, he discusses how one of the early stegosaurus, or an early find, had these rust colors next to it that the discoverer believed was actually pigment color from something like a feather. The paleontology community disagreed with him, and eventually they just thought it was rust. That was kind of the counter argument. I'll link to the video below. But what actually turns out is that when they've gone back recently with more modern technology so they could do analyze what that material was, they found that there was pigment in it, and so that, like, from the same sort of pigment that's in feathers, and there was some rust. So in this case, both of them were right. But if we would have started thinking about dinosaurs having feathers in the 1800s, we would have had a wildly different view of what dinosaurs look like. There probably wouldn't be many dinosaurs that look like this. They would have some sort of feathering on them, like some sort of light fur, from the beginning, especially with raptors and things like that. They would have been much more feathered. And we think a lot of that's because of display and intimidation. I watched, I think it's Curious Geography, or a video where he talked about gorillas and how goofy the gorilla chest beating sound is. It's not like the roar of King Kong. It's like this really high-pitched noise.
In this picture, a gorilla beating its chest and maybe you next has to be one of the most intimidating sights in nature. The sound, though.
So it could be that these displays are, the more colorful they are, the bigger they make you look, so that it displays, it's a display of dominance. In the book, Crichton describes basically everything as a browns, grays, and greens, but what we think of now is that even Triceratops have multiple colors in the frill, and again, that was for signaling things. I mean, I don't think it's a wrong impression that we based their skin tone off of like elephants and rhinos. That was really all we had to compare it to, and we didn't really understand the relationship between birds and dinosaurs. Like even this guy here, the Supersaurus, they have a lot of, in the neck, the only reason they can stand this tall, same with Brachiosaurus, is they have hollow vertebrae in their neck. And so that allows them to have this long arching neck. And so we know that a lot of dinosaurs have these lighter than expected physical structures. And some of the smaller theropods, not necessarily the Tyrannosaurids, they're much lighter than we would expect from a dinosaur like that. That's why raptors are almost the same weight as humans. They're heavier, but depending on the raptor, of course, Utah raptors, which are actually what Crichton based the velociraptors on. Velociraptors are much smaller, but Utah, calling it, yeah, we have Utah raptors, just sounds less interesting than velociraptors. Velociraptors just sound so much more dangerous. One of the points that is discussed as in both The Rise and Fall of Dinosaurs and when the planet was green, when Earth was green, or it was more touched on than that, was that in the Triassic, which is generally considered part of the dinosaurs' reign, they were actually coming into their own during that time, and there was a cataclysmic extinction event at the end of the Triassic, which it sounds gnarly as hell, and I actually want to use it in a book that I'm writing. But what apparently happened is Pangea started to split apart, and with Pangea splitting, there was the whole area where Pangea was splitting became like active volcanoes. It's happening over millions of years. I mean, we all know what plate tectonics are. If you look, you can actually go and find a place where a continent is splitting right now. In Africa, there is a lake that is forming, and it is growing about a centimeter a year or more, but it's going to be splitting, and it will eventually be a sea, and Africa will be split. And hopefully we're lucky and it doesn't turn into a volcanic splitting of the continents, because it took a very long time, like millions of years, hundreds of thousands to millions of years, for this volcanic event to stop. And during that time period, that's whenever the dinosaurs rose to prominence. They pushed out the animals that were kind of dominant at the time, and they picked up and became the dominant species. And that's why the Jurassic really is replete of tons and tons of different dinosaurs. Crichton kind of glossed over what he touched on it in the book, but a lot of it is that DNA has a very particular half-life. It doesn't last a very long time. In the book, they talk about grinding up not useful dinosaur bones and try to see if they can find DNA in it. They were looking in amber to try and see if there was any sort of way to get like trapped insects to have DNA in it. That's the approach that they used in the movie and in the book. But I mean, that's really the only way we know what insects existed, because of amber and tar and them landing on plant goo. And Black talks about that in her book. She actually goes through the whole process of a mosquito sucking the blood from a dinosaur and then landing on a tree and then getting embedded in amber. It's really well described. I definitely recommend checking it out, the way she describes it. But she also describes what happens after, including the fossilization process, which kind of indicates that even with fossilization in amber, it would have destroyed the DNA that would have been available. So I think part of it is there to help debunk this idea that we'd be able to find this DNA. We have DNA of other animals that are more recent, like the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhino, I can't remember, the Tasmanian dog. I'll put a picture of that we have video of that one. And especially since there's, 100 million years between the Triassic and the Cretaceous, there's an unlikelihood that we'd be able to get Triassic if we did get Cretaceous. Jurassic would be somewhere in the middle, of course, but it just seems unlikely that we'd be able to get all of the dinosaurs that Crichton had included. So there were some other changes between the movie and the book that I found interesting, specifically that Grant really likes children. And I think it makes sense in the movie to change it because it provided Grant an arc. He really had a flat arc in the book. He didn't really change much. He was already kind of this stoic, kind of nearly platonic ideal of a man. Very intelligent, very resourceful, good head on his shoulders, that sort of thing. The other interesting thing is that he was in his 40s and Ellie was about 24, and she was engaged to a doctor in Chicago. And they changed that to have her be a love interest of Grant's and, try to spark that interest of Malcom, which there was a little casual misogyny with Malcom, and that Grant called out, saying, you're not the only person that those shorts and those legs have caught the attention of. I think it's a good thing that was changed in the movie. I would also argue that many of the characters don't change a whole lot in the movie. Gennaro changes the most, and he actually survives towards the end because he's put face to face with the cost of the capital, the choices that his capital has made, because he owned $5 million worth of shares of InGen, so he had a direct ownership stake in the park, which is different than what was presented in the movie. And Grant actually leverages that to tell him that he's responsible for cleaning this mess up, especially since Hammond is killed in the book. I think the other character that's really interesting is Wu, and in the movie I think that he's presented as caring for these animals, caring about who they look like, how they look, how they behave. At least in the first one. I know in the later ones he's presented more as a villain, where he is much less sympathetic and just wants to create. And that really does come from this book. He doesn't really care about the dinosaurs. He could care less if they lived or died. He wants to publish these results. He wants to be shown that he's the greatest geneticist of his time. And he actually argues for making dinosaurs behave more like what people think they behaved rather than what they behave like from what they came out. And he argues that we didn't actually reproduce real dinosaurs. These aren't dinosaurs. These are a modified dinosaur. They have a variety of different lizard and amphibian and fish DNA used in them to fill in the missing gap. He doesn't even really consider the DNA more important than the fact that it's a building block. And it's Grant who, like in the movie, asks about frog DNA or notes the frog DNA because it's not explained to them in a expositional presentation that they use frog DNA. They just use some other sort of DNA. But Grant brings up the idea that these West African frogs do spontaneously change gender, which I did look to see if that's the case. And in Wikipedia, there's some back and forth about what that means. But there is a scientific definition for that, and that is it is called sequential hermaphroditism. And I know hermaphrodites isn't really a great word to describe this sort of intersex or sex change. It's how animals are described. It's not used for humans. But there are about 500 types of fish that will change from male to female, and sometimes they will change back from female back to male. It depends on like the environment, the conditions that they're in, and my therapist actually pointed out that there is salmon that actually will be kind of agender at first, and then whenever they are old enough to start being reproducing, that's whenever they pick the gender that they will choose, and they could choose male or female depending on what the populations need. And this is actually a evolutionary benefit because it allows for increased diversity of the gene pool. Because if you only have one male and multiple females, you're going to have a genetic bottleneck because of that male. But if you have the ability to change sexes and have females become males, and they can mate with the still females, then you expand your genetic gene pool pretty significantly. And part of the reason why this can happen is there are species of animals that have very low sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism is whenever the male and female look very different. Humans kind of have a relatively low sexual dimorphism. A much obvious one in the animal kingdom is male lions and female lions. They have a much more significant dimorphism than humans. But with fish, because there's a low cost of changing this is what scientists theorized, that with this low sexual dimorphism, it is easier for animals to change their sex and gender and change their gametes. So I want to make it clear that this really indicates that people being the incorrect sex at birth is something that happens in nature, and that trans rights are human rights. So as I said earlier, I think Ian Malcolm is an author insert. He really is kind of like a Socratic character, where he is kind of just rambling philosophical ideas that challenge what other people are thinking. Sometimes they have a dialogue with him, other times they don't. And his rantings get more and more out there as he progressively gets gangrenous from his wound. And in the book, he actually dies. I've totally forgot about it, considering in the movie he survives. I'll have to look to see. I bought The Lost World because I want to see how Crichton retcons that, because Malcolm is the character in The Lost World, the book, too. One of the things that I really loved Malcolm whenever I was younger, I loved the idea of chaos theory. And one thing that, looking back, that I actually did in my life without realizing is I went on and studied complexity theory. I got a master's degree in innovation sciences, and the school that I went to used evolutionary economics and complexity science and all of that for their basis of understanding economics. And a book called The Origin of Wealth kind of combines the ideas of evolution and economics. So it's like, the wealth of nations plus the origin of species, you get origin of wealth. And it's all about complexity theory, which is what chaos theory is more generally called now. If you're interested in that, there's a really great institute in Santa Fe called the Santa Fe Institute that does a lot of studying of complexity theory generally. And I really like Jeffrey West, his books, and there's a scientist called Cesar Hidalgo that I really like his Why Information Grows book. It's really fascinating about why he thinks technology changes, why information changes and grows. So I didn't do all the math that Malcom does, obviously, but I have some level of understanding of it, and I really do enjoy that. Some of the other criticisms that are laid at the feet of in this book are leveled at Hammond around capitalism, and I think it's a really early critique of venture capitalism and the risks of uncontrolled or unmanaged capitalism, where you have someone who's trying to grow rapidly and dangerously without regard for safety or security. Malcom talks about, your scientists always were concerned about whether they could, not whether they should. But I think if you step back, that there's a couple incentive structures that we need to look at for this. So from a scientific perspective, there's this idea of publish or perish, which if you have any academic friends, or whenever you were in college, you talk to any of your professors about going to academia, they will tell you that they're under immense pressure to publish often, and to publish in highly regarded journals. And this is called an impact factor. That's what in bibliometrics, the study of where you study, the citation history and all of that is called impact factor. And it's a whole study about how important a given paper is, about how central into the network of this scientific endeavor a given scientist is. And so that is a strong influence on scientists. And it is a sort of a corruption of big S science that impacts a lot of scientists themselves. And I think that's where, if you've heard of the scandals that have hit psychology, this is exactly why, because they have to publish. It leads to grants, and the more you publish, the easier it is to get grants. And you need to publish to show the results of getting those grants. And since Wu really does want to go back into, I had the sense that he wanted to eventually go back into academics after making a big name for himself, getting rich. And so those are tied together. And then Hammond has a lot of incentive to pay back the VC funding, because he had $870 million, which is this amount of money in 2023 dollars. So that's a lot of money. That's a ton of money that he has to try and recoup. So even if there were ethical concerns raised, which the book indicates that there actually were from certain researchers and certain scientists, and they were ignored. Like Grant wrote a whole paper on why this should be bad and they shouldn't do it. And same with Malcom. Malcom was just said that they would lose control because of it's a complex system that grows and learns and changes over time. It's a complex dynamic system. And you can't really control them over time, because it's kind of, like if you watch Chernobyl, that's a complex dynamic system that whenever you had a certain amount of failures, it led to a cascading failure. And that's exactly what happens in Jurassic Park. It is an example of that, where different incentives drove people to do different things. And the key failure point is actually a capitalist fail point, because generally whenever you're working with contractors, and Nedry was a contractor, he had a whole company behind him. It wasn't just him doing the programming, he had a big team. He bid for the contract to work on developing the operating system and control systems for Jurassic Park. He was the lowest bidder. And so Hammond could stretch his money. Because Hammond didn't trust NDAs and didn't trust security about it, he refused to tell Nedry enough information about how to make his product correctly, which me as a product manager, that just is horrific. You're going to fail. You're going to absolutely fail. And so Hammond basically forced Nedry to come in over this long weekend and fix the code, fix the operating system, make everything work correctly. Nedry, he did it. He was forcing Nedry to do it without paying him any extra. Nedry then was going to be losing a ton of money on this project. So he had a financial incentive to go and get recouped. And that's why he was an industrial spy. That's why he went and worked with Dodgson.
You shouldn't use my name.
Dodgson! Dodgson! We've got Dodgson here! See, nobody cares. Nice hat.
From, I forget what their company name was, but to go and steal the dino embryo so that this other genetic company can try and catch up to InGen. And so it's all these different capitalistic incentives that are a part of this complex dynamic system that lead to the failure, that leads to Nedry betraying Hammond, that leads to him turning off the fences and not understanding what that meant, and then him dying because of that and not being able to turn on the fence, and then it just cascades where people just keep dying as they try and fix and recover things. You know, they use a fractal, and you can kind of see these failures are a fractal of that, and it goes from failures in making good decisions at the beginning to fractaling out to catastrophic events. And I do want to point out that Nedry was actually really competent, even though he was a gross, ugly, slobby person. He was a highly competent person. His team was highly competent. Mr. Arnold, that was Samuel L. Jackson's character, really was impressed by the work that Nedry did. I think that a lot of this could have been eliminated if Hammond looked at the security and safety of the park as a way of driving value for guests and for people coming in. He could have actually turned that into something that he could have sold this technology to other parks. There's no reason why he wouldn't have been able to do that. And since he was talking about opening other parks, other Jurassic Parks, he could have used that same code elsewhere, and that would have made reproducing those parks less expensive. So I think this book does a really good job making a point that we need to hold capitalists responsible. We need to hold the scientists to some ethical standards. And I think that's where thinking about books like The Edge of Sentience comes in, because these are sentient creatures. You would have to use the precautionary approaches in Edge of Sentience to, just as you think about these new creatures that we're bringing back, how they interact with the world, how they interact with each other, how they interact with humans. Hammond was a narcissist, so he blames everything on everybody else. None of his decisions went wrong. It was Wu, it was Nedry, it was Arnold. They were all terrible. He was ultimately responsible. When a capitalist endeavor fails like this, where it's a systemic failure, the responsibility starts at the top, because it is their culture, and culture eats everything else for lunch at a business. So Hammond built this culture. It was a fragile, cheap, single point of fail culture, and every single one of those single points of fail is broke. If you're interested in learning more about the Mesozoic and just kind of in general, I suggest checking out Lindsay Nicole's videos about life, what that we know of series. It's a really good series. The talk goes from the very beginning of life to up to the kind of evolution of humans. I think that looking at When the Earth Was Green is another book to check out, and then of course check out The Rise and Falls of Dinosaurs if you're interested in that. So what do you think about bringing back species that are extinct? Should we do it? What type should we bring back? Should we bring back the dodo? Should we bring back some of these more interesting woolly mammoths. I kind of feel like it's a dumb idea to bring back woolly mammoths, considering we have climate change going on and they're going to run into even more issues with temperature changes. I think it's an interesting idea. I think that we need to understand the risks and have used a precautionary approach for dealing with these sentient animals. So I'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments, comment down below. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. And yeah, I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you very much.